Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Sesh. This is our first video podcast, so we're very excited. It's Nick here co-hosting with
Manny Geese in the house.
Manny Geese is in the house, and we've also got a very exciting guest today. We've got Kevin George here with us. Thanks for coming on. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good. Pleasure, man. Feeling good. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. How you doing, Manny? How are you feeling?
Well, feeling quite good actually.
Yeah.
It's going to be an interesting podcast.
Yeah, for
Our
sure.
first one ever, so let's get it.
Yeah. Nice. Oh, yeah. Kevin, do you want to tell our listeners and viewers actually a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Started off as a footballer. I was a schoolboy at West Ham, a pro at Charlton. When I came out of football at a young age, probably about 25, I then set up a company in education, providing PPA cover, which is planning, preparation and assessment for staff. So I put in staff to cover teachers. Whilst I was doing that, I began to study counselling and psychotherapy, again, delivering mental health programs in schools, then across the Premier League, and then in prisons. And then when I was working in the Premier League clubs, I created a program called SOCCOLOGY, and I found that I kept repeating myself. I thought, actually, well, if a club is not in the Premier League or not even professionally in a professional club, why not provide something that they can still get access to this information? So I ended up writing the SOCCOLOGY book. And that's me in short.
Yeah, amazing. Well, we're delighted to have you here. I've started reading. I'm about a third of the way through, and it is a really good book. Have also skipped forward some quotes of some of the players that I love as well. So yeah, thanks for being here, and yeah, really interested to chat through mental health and sport. But Manny, I think first, is it time for the question?
The big question.
The big question. The first time it's live on
Are you ready?
video and
Go on.
camera.
What's your problem, mate?
My problem is I would say the commercialization of mental health, to be honest. I think that's my problem.
Interesting.
And I think, and to be fair, even though I'm saying that, it's more deeper than that because that covers so many other areas.
Yeah.
So because it's commercialized, it's simplified as well.
Yeah.
So for example, just speak out being one. Yes, speaking out does help, but I feel that can be the wrong advice for someone who's had to repress what they've been through in order to survive.
Yeah.
Because it's okay, if I now do speak out and I've got no support in place, now what happens to me? So that's one issue that I have. And then also looking at mental health, again, it's a global conversation. And we were talking about, let's destigmatize mental health while stigmatizing the symptoms. And that's one of my issues as well, because when you look at, say, the prisons, they are greatly reflected of people who have gone through extreme trauma when they were younger. Yeah. And we all know that, but yet we'll say, oh, you know what? Oh, let's destigmatize mental health, whilst throwing all these judgments on the people that are actually going through stuff or have been through stuff. So that's my problem, mate.
Yeah, that's a good problem, and it's quite apt, especially for yogis as well, because I think to continue what you're saying, that with the commercialization, it does just feel generic, and I think what I've noticed as well is there are a lot of things that it's like a blanket thing that works for everyone rather than looking at it on a case by case basis. And for me, it's because there's different stages of mental health. There's like preventative, reactive. There's all the different stages of kind of, and one of the things I think we're trying to do at Yogis is like, it's that just first bit. It's like awareness, just the encouragement to talk about it. And then I think, because I read the other day that Better, the app, have you heard of the app Better? It's like an app that's got therapists on. It's the fastest growing app in the world.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
And I mean, it sounds quite impressive, but I also in that as well, like when you talk about the commercialization of it, it's like it's cheaper than a therapist. So they're making it more accessible. But at the same time, I saw fastest growing app in the world. And to me, that said two things. One, like everyone a lot of people now want to speak to therapists, whoever that is. But also two, are they jumping on? So there's a fine balance between jumping on and helping people and doing the right thing from like the core of who you are. And then also doing it because there's an opportunity there.
Yeah.
And like, where does that balance lie? Like, how do you think people can over commercialize it, and what do you think is right?
That's a good question. I think, so for example, you spoke about yogis, which I think is great. It's important that we do have that conversation. It's also great that people are looking to monetize. I don't think it's a bad thing to make money from helping people. So in terms of that app being the fastest growing, I don't know what it's doing, but if it is helping people, great. But when I say commercialize, I'm looking at, say, for example, how the media will say, you know what, let's cover this, or let's make a day of this. But in the same breath, when we see someone going through something, it's almost like there's no consideration. Now we're going to judge this person, maybe because they're a celebrity, because they're an athlete, because they're rich. And it's like, well, actually, no, we need to keep consistency here. It's not about mental health week or day. It's like, okay, well, let's be curious to understand what this person's going through. And institutions as well.
So, Kev, if I could just
Sorry, go on.
jump in quickly. So you think it's becoming more like a product-based kind of like movement? Because mental health is emotions and feelings, but the way the media sometimes packages like a product, it's like to sell.
I don't think they do it as a product to sell. I think they do it as a product. I think they do it as a topic to talk about and just keep moving. Like with another, like a lot of other social issues that are very serious. It's like, okay, this topic's trending. Let's cover it. Let's talk about it. But then now just move on. So it's like, this is going to get attention. This is trending right now. Yeah. But then look, and I do think that they should have more responsibility. People talk about famous people and how the influence they have. But when I look at the people I looked up to when I was a kid, they had strong influence over me in terms of, for example, how they dance or the clothes they wore, the football boots they wore. But in terms of the words that they said, if I'm being honest, I didn't really, even though I might listen to the music, it didn't really influence me. But journalists, they shape the minds of police officers, teachers, parents. They are more powerful, if I'm being honest. Like, a rap star can make you wave your hands and like you don't care. That's it. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But other than that, it's going to be completely different. So that's one of my issues with it. And just one more thing. I think institutions should have more of an understanding and should be more skilled in this area. So, for example, schools, you shouldn't be able to qualify as a teacher unless there's parts of your syllabus that make you aware of, say, mental health, for example. Because you're going to be dealing with people from all sorts of backgrounds who go through all sorts of stuff. And while I'm sitting here right now, half the week, I manage a project in the school, a counselling project. So a teacher will be in a class with a child that's tried to take his own life, another one who's self-harming. Their classroom is full up with all these children. And when they're going through stuff and it might play out in the classroom, they're going to be punishing them. They're going to be re-triggering them without even being aware of it.
Yeah. I think what I'm getting, and like being a teacher, like a good teacher is such a hard job just to like put that out there. But what I'm kind of like getting at, or what I'm kind of understanding is, it's like we're destigmatizing it, we're talking about it, but then when the consequences happen, we're like, yeah, put them in prison, or we're like sweeping it under the carpet, or like, let's not talk about it. So it's like, let's talk about the stage before, but then the consequences from all this trauma, you know, and we don't know people's trauma, whether it's childhood trauma, something that's a traumatic event that's happened to them. We don't know it, but we're judging them then from the consequences as opposed to the bit before, the, you know, like destigmatizing it and them saying, I have a problem with X, Y, and Z. But actually what we're doing is we're ignoring the consequences, which is where it is the most important. I guess that's where it's almost most important to like, that's the important bit to get stuck into, to understand why someone has done this and why they're traumatic and the consequence of the trauma has led to like that action in particular.
So that's your solution basically for teachers to like, you know.
Yeah, not just teachers. Obviously, as you know, when I do work in football, I think it's the same with professional football clubs. So at the moment, they would have like a psychologist, but I know from coaches I speak to at these clubs, they're who call me, and I might say, okay, so what's going on with that young player? And they say, oh, well, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me that player will be going through stuff and goes to the psychologist, and it is confidential. And I think that's important to have, but it's going to be difficult for the coach to empathize with this player who's just being disruptive to their session because they don't know what's going on. Where it'd actually be probably more productive if you had someone as part of the coaching team who could, one, speak to the coach and say, look, to be fair, you could be a bit more mindful in terms of your behavior, just in general, but also because they're aware of maybe what this person's going through as an individual, then they might be able to feed back to the coach and kind of be that intermediary person. So I think that's why whether it be in schools, it depends on your role, basically. But saying that, being a teacher is extremely difficult, and this is why I think the conversations are kind of surface level, because then we have to completely rethink the systems.
That's what I was thinking. Don't the parents have a duty too to perhaps learn more about mental health problems?
They do, but if you are a traumatized child who then goes on to have a child, then you're going to be stuck in your own cycles too. Yeah.
Fair.
And this is kind of what we're dealing with. So
It's
you
a
know,
domino effect, basically.
yeah, you know, like we grew up in the same area. But now, I mean, so I've been working in, as I said, a lot of schools. But now there's our friends who have had kids who have been in schools that I've worked in, and I'll see the kids playing up. Then when the parents come, I'm like, oh, like I knew your dad who was robbing and doing all this and that.
Yeah.
So it's funny because when I'm studying about this stuff. But then now
You're seeing
studies,
you're seeing it in real life now.
it goes back to my childhood with my
Yeah.
friends that were.
Yeah. I've heard stories. You know.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's difficult for parents because they don't know. But again, they're stuck in these trauma cycles and they have kids and they're in these cycles. I think we'd have to rethink the systems, and I don't know what you would need, but I'd honestly believe that this is more important than education.
So have you heard that phrase? It takes a village to raise a community. So everything starts from
Village
perhaps
to raise a
the
child.
council, the boroughs. Are they putting more programs out there to help, families going through things?
All right, let me think. There's a couple ways I can answer this. So first of all, I've learned this, which is quite upsetting, but I don't think people care enough. So, and I've been in different situations whereby that's been proven in terms of whether it be staff at school who are supposed to, or social workers, even having a conversation with CAMs who are meant to be like, heading up children's mental health. Everyone is looking to cover their own back.
Do you think, it comes to money, perhaps? They don't want to invest.
A part of it is money. So going back to what I was saying about CAMs have been dragged through the mud, right? In terms of there've been documentaries about them, people are calling them out. And there's a part of me that thinks, do you know what? Obviously, people genuinely want better and they want to do good. But when they're stretched, they will naturally try and take the easy way out. But then this is where integrity comes into play, where you have to say, do you know what? Our money's stretched here. We have to stand up and say something, or we have to say, we know what, we can't service X, for example. And if the company can't do that, then it's down to the individuals to say, you know what, thanks, but no thanks. Yes, you've got to earn a living, but you don't need to earn a living working for one company. You can go somewhere else. Because I found myself in that situation, whether it be working in equality in football or working with mental health for children. I'm not going to put myself in it because now I'm part of that system. And people would easily and I've had this with me, people say, do you know what, Kev, you help the kids though, you help them. Well, actually, yeah, but not really, because sometimes I've been used to get kids expelled. So with girls, I found that, and I don't have the exact data for this, but girls would sit quietly in the class, they're not disrupted, so they don't get picked up, right? And they're self-harming. But with boys, they'll be more aggressive. And because they're aggressive, it's like, oh, they've got a problem. Okay, so you can deal with that, right? And so what happens is, and I just lost my trail of thought while I went on to this point, by the way. But yeah, basically, anyway, what I was going to say is that I just feel like, I'm trying to get back my thought now why I said that. About people not caring enough, that was it. I feel as though like if you cause a problem, then you get the attention, but it's more about just dealing with it so you're no longer a problem anymore. So then what would happen is it's like, okay, for example, mental health, problem equals X. Okay, give it Y, done. It doesn't work that way. Because if I'm traumatized, I'm stuck in a cycle. People sometimes think trauma is an event. It's an experience, but it's not. I mean, I went through a time where I nearly died in 2020 when I went with Charlton on a pre-season trip, and my teammate died. Wow. So, and it's a lot. There's so much happened, right? But 8 years afterwards, I was in the Dominican Republic trying to just swim in, and I had a panic attack. Never had a panic attack before. As far as I knew, I've gone through that situation. It's in the past. But what happened is my body was remembering, and it had all the stimuli for that moment. So I went into the same kind of panic that I had at that moment. Now, there are other people that were traumatized on that same day, but for different reasons. And there were other people who also were there that were not traumatized. And that was because I wasn't able to use my stress hormones to escape. I got saved. But if I was able to, for example, use that to escape, I wouldn't be traumatized anymore. But because I wasn't, what happens now is those stress hormones that are meant to save me now act against me. So whenever I go in that same place with that stimuli, I have a panic attack.
It's the trigger that you get,
Yeah. But because we don't know what mental health is, we don't know what trauma is, and these are institutions, and even when I qualified as a counsellor, I didn't know. How are we going to help people?
Yeah. Well, it's because like what you're saying is, you know, again, it comes to that consequence, you know, rather than like, you know, what happened to you when you were in the sea is like the consequence of the trauma. But to like understand that traumatic event and actually how it affected you, you've got to go deep. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, it's not surface level. You can't see by having one chat, you know, you've got to go really deep to kind of really understand like the full picture and like holistically where that trauma is coming from to lead to that consequence, that event. And actually one thing that you said a little bit earlier is, which I really liked, was like, it's integrity of a company. So it's like almost going back to the original problem about the commercialization of things like mental health. It's like, if you do it with integrity, it's a good thing. Do you know what I mean? Well, it's like, if you actually have, and we all know like if people are doing things for the right reasons, right? And if people do it with integrity and for the right reasons, it is a good thing. Yeah. But I think if people do it because they've spotted an opportunity, I think you can smell it after like, do you know, I think you can smell it after a while at least, if not straight away.
1,000%. Listen, I've done the mental health first aid course because I'm someone, if I'm going to critique something, I think I have to experience it. And the person I did it with is a friend, and she was really good. But in terms of what the mental health first aid is, I don't understand kind of how that positions someone in terms of against your traditional first aid, if that makes sense. So I think we're kind of taking shortcuts on certain things that are really serious and that we shouldn't be doing. But yeah, even just going back to what you were saying, it's when I went through that event, I remember my mum saying you need to go and see a counsellor. But the thing is, when you grow up being a young footballer who is, you know, told you got to basically be a geezer,
man up,
and you got to see the weakness in the opponent and your teammates because you're competing with them, and you grow up with places where we grew up, you form a distance with your emotions. So I'm now going into a space where I'm supposed to explore my emotions, but I'm a stranger to them. I don't think my counsellor was good anyway, but to be fair to her, it was going to be extremely difficult to be in tune with someone with me who was strangers to his emotions, and his strategy was to repress. And to this day, really, even though I would say as a therapist, and I get counselling as part of my supervision, I've got to get it, it's still my strategy. So these are things that we need to know about ourselves. But again, the blanket out there, it's like, oh yeah, mental health, depression, anxiety, talk.
And I think that's what Nick was right. You know, with yogis, we're trying to open up a dialogue. I think the dialogue is very key. It's the first step, you know, being more open about going counselling, you know, all these things that's available to help you. Like, you was young, you wasn't used to this kind of processes of trying to heal yourself. Because from where we come from, we don't speak about counselling. We deal with it, you know.
And I think in the same way, it's like if someone had like something that was more serious, I would say like we're not set up for that. Do you know what I mean? It's like if someone needs to speak to someone, or like we direct them to or signpost them to like the relevant people, because like
But that's what I'm trying to say. But that's good though. So I'm saying there's different levels. So we've got yogis, for example. You've got yogis. You've got this app that you was talking about. But the responsibilities, when I look at, say, the institutions that should be doing the deeper stuff, that's the problem. Because I'll be honest with you, as a young kid, I would engage with yogis. I'm not going to be engaging with, for example, psychologists or a psychiatrist because culturally they're not going to get me. They're so far removed. I'm going to see them as old and boring and whatever. So this is where I'm going to come for my information. But what my concern is when I look at, say, the bigger institutions or establishments that house these kids, that's a problem for me. That's the problem.
And that's where you've got to look at like the whole of society, and that's like, it needs a whole revamp basically.
Especially, as I said, it's funny. So a lot of my work is always kind of based on my journey, and so that's why obviously my first book and my second book will be about football, but the third one's going to be about the hood and looking at who I grew up around, And those people who are misjudged in this world, because, you know, sometimes we hear about gangs and kids stabbing, especially in London, but not understanding the lifestyles they come from and why they do that. And again, I go back to me repressing my emotions, but my first football team and my first youth club was at the hub of ghetto or Moonshot.
Moonshot.
Now, so as a 10-year-old, I'm seeing people. This is when Lucozade bottles were glass, getting bottled and stabbed with these. So if that's my childhood, I was lucky. My home was safe. When I was outside my home, extreme violence. I was lucky. If I didn't have that,
same.
do you see what I'm saying?
I grew up in Crofton Park, so
broccoli youths and ghetto.
Yeah.
So my thing is if we look at this and we look at it from a mental health standpoint, do you know what we won't say? We won't use terms like grooming. So in the papers, you say, "Oh my God, these young boys are getting groomed and they're going, what do they call it again? When they county lines and I always say, if you look at a tree, what we're discussing is the leaf, because these kids aren't getting groomed. They are dying to do that stuff.
Yeah.
The olders, I want to be a younger. I'm dying for you to take me on, accept me. And if you look at it, it's like a rebirth. It's like you give them the name, you protect them if anyone troubles them.
New family. Like, that's
because they want what they're missing. I've got some of my friends who are probably the most feared guys like on the street.
Yeah.
And you know what? No family.
Well, Kevin, you know, there are some kids that are from good families and they do turn this way sometimes because they feel like they need to be accepted.
Yep.
Yeah, because we didn't have to go that way because we were from good family perhaps, but I knew people that had good parents, and they still find themselves, you know, going through this journey. But
this is why I would say to you, it's if those people you said who had good parents, if they sat down here right now and said, "Tell me about your childhood," because from our perspective, we might say good parents. Okay. It would be what would be their experience
on the outside, man. Yeah, we never know, like,
because
the
if you've got
relationships,
exactly, because if you're growing up in a safe home and one where you feel that you're being adhered to as a person, I know people want the attention. Look, when you're on the roads, you get the girls, all that stuff, the attention, and it's an exciting life. But you're very aware of all the risks that come into play. And I think if you've got a safe home and you're getting everything you need, it's highly unlikely that you'll get caught up in that stuff. Highly. And I was so in it because of, and again, I say this with teachers that I work with, my neighbours, my football teammates, my schoolmates. So I was so within it, but I was also aware not to make certain decisions because I was able to just to kind of assess things and weigh things up. And it's like, okay, I don't need to do that for attention.
Yeah.
No, that's got this risk attached to it. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So, from my understanding, what you're saying, there needs to be more of a correlation with people like Yogis, you know, the app. You know, it needs to feel like organic because, you know, you got one company there. But if there's a correlation between these companies, you find your tribe within this space. Do you know what I mean? Like a space that you feel comfortable and safe talking about things. That's what I think is important. And like Yogis is right for some people, for other people they need something different. And I guess it's like where these spaces are. I think that might signal the end of the first half. Indeed.
This is the sound of the whistle.
Wait! Before you do the whistle, just wait one more thing.
Go on.
The lips were on the whistle, but it's retracted.
It's Fergie time.
It's Fergie time.
But just in general, in terms of men's mental health, I just find it quite interesting that there's this big thing about, you know, men and their mental health, and they need to speak up, and they need to do this, and they need to do that. Society doesn't allow men to embrace their vulnerable side as much as it says these things. Yes. I remember I was on the Clubhouse app, and there was a group of women talking about men being vulnerable and things. And I said, I put this in the room, I said, if someone breaks into your house and your man is with you in bed and he doesn't want to go downstairs, how are you going to view that man? Because on one hand, we have to be prepared on so many levels. And I use the example basically to go for war. Like when it hits the fan, we already know how it's going to go down. And so I know that if I'm going to be in that position, there's going to be a certain part of me I have to shut down and always be on alert because of that. I think sometimes when we talk about these things, about saying being vulnerable or being a certain way, we have to look at that from looking at every angle of this, not just saying it. And it's not, being vulnerable isn't just a case of saying, oh, okay, I'm going to express how I feel. It's looking at, actually, I could be scared going to do that, but I still have to go and do that. Looking at my role as a man.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's something in itself. But I wanted to just mention that.
No, I think that's really important. I think without jumping into like another topic completely, like how we define masculinity is still, you know, because like what you're saying, like there's the old traditional way of talking about masculinity, like the macho, like protector. Then, you know, people are talking about men being vulnerable, but then, you know, there's like so many different areas. It's so hard to just say be vulnerable and, you know, like what you're saying, if you need to protect, you need to protect. Like you like you've got to protect. Like if it's your family as well, that is part of your role. So I think, and I you know, it feels like this is something that over the next near future, the next 5 or 10 years, masculinity and actually what it means to be a man is changing so much at the moment. And if sometimes it will go too far, sometimes it might come too far back. But I think like, yeah, that's something that is just being worked through. And I don't think no one has quite got to like what
small steps,
that
small
answered.
Steps, you know,
Yeah.
It starts with the communication. Yeah. Then from there, you know, we see where we go. You know, life's changing every day. You know. So one step at a time for the man them.
For sure. All right, I think that's the end of Fergie time. Normally Fergie time's at the end of the second half, but we got extra Fergie time at the end of this half. Proper old school Old Trafford. So here is a whistle, and that signifies the end of the first half. I think we're probably ready to jump straight into the second half. I don't think we need oranges and team talk. I think we'll jump straight into it.
This is not Sunday League, is it?
To be fair, it's been a good match. To be fair, we're up front, holding man Makelele. I'm in number 10.
I like Makelele.
What a player!
Yes,
one of the best. So we will jump into the second half, where we're talking about mental health in sport in particular. And yeah, I think based on, the book and your experience as well, it'll be a really interesting chat. I think it'd be good to maybe start off just, and you know, not just in sport, but in society, we've already said that mental health is becoming more important.
Yeah.
But in today's world and in today's game, how important is mental health? Because someone who hasn't been an elite sportsman and part of that world, I kind of, I'm really interested personally to know as well, like, how important is it in elite sportsmen to have that mental health resilience and have that mental health strength?
Wow, that's such a wide question. So it's important. I think football, being in that space, it builds your resilience. So I always say that obviously I went into education afterwards, and when Ofsted come into a school, the teachers, Ofsted are like police and teachers are like drug dealers. They literally, seriously, like the night before they're running around panicking. Any teachers watch this or relate to one, they know. Whereas for me, I'm like, I'm cool because I'm just going to do what I usually do. I'm confident and whatever. But it's because, it made me think about it, it's because I was under so much pressure and stress from a young age being in football that it's conditioned me. So when I look at it, I went on loads of trials, getting released and stuff, but I was always getting observed, always under pressure. It's like, okay, are you good enough to be signed? Okay, great. Now, are you good enough to start? Are you going to be good enough to get accepted by your teammates? Are you good enough to get a new contract? You are consistently under scrutiny every day. Yeah. And then on top of that, it's almost like, imagine us doing this every day. All of a sudden, someone who owns this platform says, okay, you know what, Manny, thanks, but you're not welcome anymore because we don't feel you're performing. Instantly, we're thinking, oh my God, like we could be next. That's football, right?
It's cutthroat, isn't it? I've never thought of it like that.
And then on top of that, there's this, you might have a manager that micromanages you. So I'll give you an example. My experience of being in school, playing football for fun, loving it, right? Final year, schoolboy at West Ham, they release a load of players who are like seen as like the best. I'm thinking, these guys are better than me. I've got no chance. They say, Kevin, we're not sure about you. I was buzzing. I was thinking, oh my God. I felt like they said, give me a 10-year contract. Buzzing, right? I go back. I was a striker. They bought Jermaine Defoe. I thought, okay, I've got no chance because they've got to justify buying another 6-year for 1.6 million, right? So I then go to Charlton because my friend plays there. Did really well, and I ended up getting signed. A few months later, I'm training with the first team. We're just back in the Premier League. So remember I said, West Ham, playing with my mates, going to Charlton, playing my age group, first time, full time. Premier League, training with the first team. I get the ball, I pass it to someone, can't remember who. We had a winger called John Robinson who plays for Wales International, right?
Yeah.
He gave me a rollicking. Give it up! And he swears, ball. So I'm 16. All my organs in my body just jumble all over the place, isn't it?
Like you're 16, yeah.
Yeah. And there was no prep for that to say, look, for example, when you go into full-time football, first of all, the training is crazy. The pressure, the stress on your body, players get anxious every preseason, without doubt. Like, the training you do is mad. The game is quick. It doesn't look anywhere as quick. You see when you see it on TV, if you play it, you will be struggling. It's crazy. So anyway.
Oh, yeah, don't doubt our struggle.
But the emotion in terms of the pressure every day is something I've never experienced before in my life. And then you've got a manager that maybe who doesn't really speak to you, might drop you or might micromanage you. So I became very anxious when I was playing. And I didn't enjoy it. But I wish that someone prepared me for that, because if I was prepared and I understood that, I would have been better and I would have done a lot better in football. But instead, I kind of felt sorry for myself. I was a bit anxious, and I was looking for the environment to be better to support me, instead of having a certain mindset of saying, you know what, regardless wherever I am, I'm going to perform to this level regardless. So that's why I love Ronaldo. Everyone talks about his goals and all that. But you take Ronaldo and put him in any team, because even with Portugal, who are not really the strongest over the years, Ronaldo's going to be Ronaldo. You put him with players who probably aren't up to it, or all these managers he's had at Madrid and different systems, and he still performs. And I was so busy trying to fight to get in to be a pro footballer and be fit, but emotionally, I was nowhere near it. And I think that for me was, when we talk about mental health in football, that's one of the reasons why players crumble.
And it's interesting you say that, because my next question is about managing your sacrifices. You know, as for young footballers, all they see is the goal, the glitz and the glamour. They don't understand that they're going to have to sacrifice time, people. Do you think, you know, they should do more to educate young footballers about how to, you know, manage the sacrifices and be happy with it?
Not really, because I think players do sacrifice and they're aware of this and they're always told that. I don't think they're properly told what the biggest sacrifice is.
Yes, that's what I'm
the
getting into.
Biggest, before, you know, they're told you need to work hard. You know, you might maybe not have a girlfriend to your older, or maybe don't get to partying. But the biggest sacrifice is of self. You get players who struggle when they retire or they get released, because when they go into football, they're taught that it's a symbiotic relationship. So it's like you work hard and you give to the player, and in return, the player will give you a career, medals, and money. And it's a relationship between the two. But actually, it's parasitic. The player takes everything from you. And that's the problem. That's the biggest sacrifice. And I think that if you let players know this, then they can adjust to a stage where they can keep part of themselves. Yeah. So, for example, if I was younger right now, I would say, as soon as I became a pro, I'll say to young players is, as soon as you become a footballer, you no longer have that hobby. So you need to go and find another one. That's now your job. And you keeping your hobby helps keep your identity, a piece of you. Yes, it's your break away from your job.
But do they have time to do that?
Yeah, they do.
It's
because
so demanding.
No, you go into training, you finish by 1 o'clock. Okay. So you got the whole day.
Oh wow!
So I would
play FIFA most of the time.
So I would say go and do and it's great because now times have changed. Like Bellerin's into fashion. You get all these players. Whereas even though he still gets criticised, a lot of players don't do it because they get criticised.
Has that affected his performances for Arsenal?
I don't think so. No, and also you have to understand is sometimes people say that, right? They will say, oh, you know what, you can't concentrate on the pitch. I don't agree with that. Look at the things Rashford's doing. They're actually trying to say that it affects his performances. Any little... Come on.
People look for excuses.
And also provide the information then. We can't just say that. So I would say that in terms of the sacrifice is that players need to understand that that's their job and separate it. So I've got pictures of me, funnily enough, when I was younger, and I've got... at home, I've got my Charlton sweatshirt on and I've got a Lucozade bottle. And it's like, no, I'm now bringing Charlton into my home. And my friends, the friends are using nicknames and stuff. You need to keep it separate. Keep it completely
treat
separate.
it like a job.
Keep it completely distant.
So if you're my manager and I goes to you, I want to do some, mountain biking or some dirt biking. It's quite a dangerous sport to have as a hobby, right? Would the club allow you to do that?
Not because you're not even allowed to ride a motorbike, so you're not covered under insurance. So not dangerous stuff, but you can still have other hobbies.
So it's limited. Your hobbies.
There's so many hobbies out there.
Yeah, there's so
if I want to ride my dirt bike with them.
So Ben Foster does mountain biking, so you can ride bikes, but not dirt biking. But I would just say that be aware of the sacrifice and making sure that you have a completely separate life. And the reason this is so important is because once you retire or once you get released, the transition's not so big. But if you don't maintain self, then all of a sudden, let's say you become a full-time footballer at 16. Now your personal life gets paused. Let's say you're lucky to get to 35 in football. Now all of a sudden, you've got unpaused 16-year-old you. You've got to revisit that because you don't know. You're not living a real life. So it's like, oh my God, what's going on here? This is where depression kicks in.
Yeah, well, one of the things I was going to ask is like, because you were saying that when you were 16, you kind of like, you felt that stress, that pressure, that anxiety when the Welsh winger, like shouted at you, like, like, and also I know you touched on it earlier in the first half. Is do you think football players? Do people talk about it? Like, are players talking about it? Are they being vulnerable? And we're not saying like pouring their heart out, but just do they have a network where they can just say or go to a teammate and be like, "Fuck, training was hard today. Like, I can't believe like he shouted at me." Or like,
oh, leave off. That's what you're gonna get. You're gonna get hammered.
You're gonna get
But then also you have to remember is that society gives football its own set of rules. So football's a gated community, and whatever happens in there, even though those gates are getting weakened because of EPPP, this is allowed to happen here. So I saw Rio on a podcast the other day talk about Roy Keane punching Chris Eagles in the face. And there's been other stories like that. And I'm looking at it, how I used to look up to senior players. They have a certain level of power, right? And even just in general, first team coaches, there's a lot of bullying that happens in football. And that gives you an example where not only is that accepted, but he openly said it on the podcast. And it's like, but that is representative of the culture in football where we allow that to happen. And to young players. If it's two first team players, I'll be like, oh, okay. But actually, when you think, wow. And this isn't, by the way, anything against Rio. It's just talking about how we as people in general, we okay it. We see it at Chelsea in a different way where I think it was Alex and maybe Malouda. You're not allowed to train with the first team. You just got to run around the training pitch all day. I've got friends right now as we speak who couldn't move on deadline day, and they're not allowed in the training ground until everyone's left, and then they've got to run. So when we talk about
bullying culture, isn't it? Like,
so this is what I'm saying. So when we talk about mental health, and it's tokenistic because everyone's aware of that, but contractually, clubs can get away with this, by the way, because I think you've got to do like say a 9 to 5, like you can. But as I said, players leave the training ground by 1. So what I'll be saying to you guys, say I don't really want you around. I'm going to say this. You're not allowed in the training ground till 2 o'clock. So bear in mind, you've been on this same schedule for years when everyone's gone and you've got to run. And then your agents could be like, all right, listen, I've got this move for you. But the club will say, well, no, we want money for you. So it's like, okay, but if you go to certain clubs, we won't take money for you. So basically what they're saying is if you go to a decent club, we want money.
Yeah.
Politics.
But again, what does that do to the player? But people are interested because they're looking at like, oh, you're privileged.
Yeah. And they're a commercial asset. Like, players become, like you're saying, like, we want good money for you.
And this is the education I was talking about. They're letting them know, this type of scenarios could happen. Because some people just go into football thinking it's going to be like, lovely flying through. But
it does, yeah. I was going to say, like, it does feel, like, as an Arsenal fan, I know you are as well. Like, it does feel like the latest crop of Arsenal youngsters coming through do feel like really level-headed. And like I don't know if you know that that's a fact, but do you think now that football clubs are putting more of an emphasis on that? And because like you look at the young players now, the Bellerins, the Rashfords, like the Saccas, like they're people who like they've got personality, they believe in things, and they talk. And do you think it is changing, or now that the Roy Keanes are out the game, training session with Roy Keane sounds about as scary as it gets, but do you think it is changing?
No, not really. No, I think, as I said, EPPP has changed football because it's brought in the psychologists and other people from outside. Because that football was very, I don't know if incestuous is the right word, but it's almost like, oh, you played? All right, yeah, you be the coach. Oh, you played? Or you can do this role. You drive the bus, whatever. But now you're bringing people who think differently, although they are not. From my experience, a lot of people are not brave enough to maybe challenge situations that happened. It's changing the culture. But with regards to the players, it's difficult because we don't know specifically. Like they might, for example, they could be more mature because the culture of football's changed, but it doesn't mean what they're going through has changed,
So
So yeah.
So like in terms of pressure, like,
it's worse now.
You got pressure from fans. You got pressure from the managers. And
Social media now has added another.
Fans are very notorious these days. They don't really, have any patience for anything.
But the thing is, people say the fans, which they are, but it's almost like
some of them anyway, not all of them.
Yeah, no, but I was gonna say I don't really have an expectation for the fans. If I'm being honest, like, okay, fans are gonna say whatever. What social media is a big thing, and people talk when they say social media, they think of fans, but it's the big platforms. When you look at say like I don't know, but say the Talk Sports, the Sky Sports and stuff, they've got to create content. So now all of a sudden, if they've got to create content, like us three now, we'd be like this. Oh, well, Pep Guardiola, he's lost Man City. They've lost 2 games on the spin. And then all of a sudden we're talking, their players, oh yeah, but Sterling hasn't scored 1 game. And now we're having a conversation about a player who's not scored in a game.
Yeah,
the next week, oh, Man City are flying. They've won 2 games on Spain. Sterling got a hat-trick. So all of a sudden it's like that. And we don't realise that those platforms then stir up the other conversations and the mindsets of these fans who are watching and commenting. So now you're a player at home, your notifications keep going through the roof. And it's 1 minute it's like you're amazing, the other minute you're rubbish. And you're like,
constantly judged.
Constantly.
I guess that with what you were saying before, people are not taking it seriously. For instance, that the media might want to drive that kind of narrative to make more money, to make more sales. So I guess you're right. Sometimes, companies out there to make a buck out of this.
It's a trending topic. That's what people do. So, which is sad in a way. But that's why I was saying, going back to saying mental health or whether it be around equality or whatever, a lot of the platforms only want to have conversations if it's trending. Because a prime example, when I wrote that book, the most compelling story for me is Moses Ashikode's story, which we spoke about before, right? And I thought, there's a player who's gone through hell.
Who did he play for, by the way?
So Millwall, Watford, Rangers, and some other teams, right? And the trauma that he's probably still going through to this day, which has stemmed from his childhood where football has failed him dramatically, that's in the book. But because my book was released before the World Cup, Fabian Delph's in it, all these big players are in it, everyone's picked out these big players, but they've completely missed that story. And I felt like that's a metaphor for what's happened in football, where you keep missing players like that or those stories like that. Yeah. Because it's about, okay, well, this guy plays for the bigger club. Yeah. This guy's going to the World Cup. Let's talk about that. That's the problem.
And like, maybe this is me wanting to bring it back to Arsenal and like just a personal interest, but really interested to get your opinion. Is obviously what happened in the Euros in the summer. You've got Saka stepping up to take that penalty. Yeah. How can a kid, as an Arsenal fan, I love him. When he was walking up, I was nervous for him, and I just cannot. How can someone be ready for something like that? Can you ever be ready like that? Is there training that you can do to get you in that? Like, we're talking like the most high pressure situation, and a kid steps up. Yeah.
Only experience can prepare you for that. You can practice 1 million penalty kicks in a day. Look, a professional footballer plays football every day, right? You're trying to kick the ball into the net from 12 yards. It's a very easy task. It's not actually the physical aspect of kicking the ball. It's the actual experience, the environment. And so for Saka or any player that's young, it's going to be either you've literally got balls of steel like a Ronaldo, or you're someone like, say, Harry Maguire, because he was a centre-back and he took the best penalty. And that's because of him being a leader. And don't get me wrong, he's technically, for a centre-back, he's very good. But that's because he's a senior player, experience. I'm going to take responsibility. That wasn't about the actual technique, That allowed him to execute and be confident to take that style of free kick.
So it's all about confidence.
Penalty, sorry.
So it's all about confidence, really. Because up to that point, Saka had a great game. Was he on in that game?
Yeah, he came on in the end. But the difference, this is another thing with players, right? So Saka's career's gone like this. I mean, I watched him when he was like under 14s at Arsenal. Unbelievable. But there's a time where, this is where you see the greats. They go through this and they go through that, and the greats go back up. So if you look at, say, Henry, Juve, he didn't even do bad, to be fair. He just didn't do as well. And then Arsenal, bam, right? You go through so many. Mbappe, same thing. Until last year, probably, say to the Euros and whatnot, and then now he's going to go back up. It happens with so many players. And this is Saka. I think sometimes it's almost like things are going so great that you can't really fail, and then you hit that one bump. And that was his bump.
Yeah, it was a big bump.
But going
he
back to
feels
Arsenal,
like he's gone.
I was going to go back to Arsenal. I know you're the big fan, which you're reading there.
I thought left out in this one.
I'll give you one for Man United as well.
Yeah.
But Gail Clichy,
Yeah,
which
I
you
read
read in
the
there.
Gail
Oh, you
Clichy.
read that?
That's the thing I
Oh,
skipped
okay.
through. Oh, yeah,
Okay. Well, yeah, meditation. People don't talk about that. Obviously, we talk about yoga with gigs, but Gail talking about how he started meditation and
the
he
yoga
noticed a
nidra
spike.
as well, which is like, I mean, I'm into yoga and go to India to practice. Yoga nidra is kind of like to say like it's like far out in yoga. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like basic, like that's quite spiritual. I hate using that word in instances like, but that's quite spiritual form of yoga, and he's doing it, which I was really surprised to read about.
And he's deep into it as well. So you've got him. I'm trying to find a Man United story for you as well. But there's a lot of people talk about Man. There's a lot of Man United experiences in the book because Quinton Fortune's in there, Kieran Richardson's in there, and I think some others as well.
I think his story was similar to yours, Kieran. You know, he was at Man United training with the first team every day. You know, he's gaining confidence. Then all of a sudden, things just changed drastically. Then you're in a place where you're not comfortable with. And I think this kind of leads me to my next question. As footballers, right, it's like you're in one world. It's like you're in one environment. Then when you leave that environment, you're going to a family environment. How do you maintain both, you know, in trying to be a family man and trying to be the best you can in that sport?
To be honest, I think players are all right with it. I think the biggest problem that families have is when the players retire, because the players now managing, trying to find who they are as a person, and the family adjusting to it. You get a lot of divorces. I can't remember the percentage around that time.
It's living two lives, basically. You get the first life has been a footballer, then when you retire, it's another new life.
Yeah,
you need to adapt to.
And I think, I no one's really spoke about this, but I think it's because the players, as I said before, about becoming the player persona.
Yeah.
So when they retire and they become who they actually are, maybe that's when they can see their partner for who that person is, and maybe that partner can also see who they truly are, and realizing actually, I don't really like you. And that's why you get a lot of footballers who are really close. They train every day. They emotionally go through roller coasters. They win things. They lose. And then when they retire, they're not even friends. Not because they've fallen out, but they just don't, because it's like, okay, what we've projected is close, but who we are isn't close. Yeah. And I think that's what the difference is.
And like you were saying, like, you know, when you're in that environment as well, you don't like fully show who you are sometimes, whether that be through emotions. I was going back to Gail Clichy, and because I actually had a chat with the yoga teacher, this woman called Sarah, who was Giggsy's, Ryan Giggs's, I think yoga teacher for quite a few years. I think he calls her out in one of his books or podcasts he did. And one thing she told me is that, because she's taught at City, Chelsea, and she was saying that one thing when it comes to teaching something like yoga with footballers is you have to completely take out you just have to make it so pragmatic and simple and take out all the spirituality. So at the end in yoga, you do corpse pose, which is called Shavasana. In when she goes to clubs, she never says Shavasana. She will always, and you go to any studio in London, they'll say Shavasana, but it's relaxation pose. And so with these tools that we have available to us, like yoga, breathwork, meditation, yoga nidra, all these things, we know they're good tools. Like we know that they help. Do footballers still look at them with a bit of a, and I know people like Hector, Bellerin and Koscielny, I only use Arsenal example, into yoga.
Yeah.
But like, are most footballers like, I'm not going to do, I'm not going to do yoga. I'm not going to do, it might help me stretch, but I'm not going to like do the meditation and stuff like that.
Back in the day, I would say, yeah, now people are more open-minded, but it's funny you say that, because in terms of like using the language and stuff, because I've seen it from my perspective as a player, but also as a facilitator as well. So, for example, when I was playing, someone from the PFA will come and be like, oh, man, I just want to go out and train. Or even when I've seen other people come in to teach programs, they're like, oh, here we go. Like when people start using certain language. So with regards to yoga, players will be open to it, especially now because they hear the stories of, say, Ryan Giggs, and they're aware of different ways of, prolonging their career and prehab. But yeah, if you've got to make it as much using language that they are familiar with, and make it as football-like as possible, and they'll be on board. Otherwise, what you'll do is you'll only get the ones who have open minds. You won't get
like
the majority.
The Hectors and the
Do you know who started it?
Sorry, who started what?
The whole yoga thing as a footballer.
No.
Roberto Baggio.
Oh, was it?
He was big on that. They call him the little Buddha.
There's a player in the book who talks about Baggio, who played with him actually.
Yeah.
So and by the way, just going back to what I was saying about what you're saying about the yoga and about having to use relaxation pose. Even the fact of we had a new physio at Charlton, and I remember one time he tried to say, "Okay, guys, all right, stop talking." We're like, "What? Who are you talking to?" Like, even something as simple as that. It's like you try and change things. Like, no.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Baggio, man. Oh, anyway, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, and I think that actually might be the end. I feel like we could probably go on chatting for like another hour or so.
It's time to relax.
Yeah. This is any more Fergie time, or are we good for the final whistle?
I think we've won this one.
There's the sound of the final whistle. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on and being part of the first video podcast we've ever done. It's been really interesting. I, from a personal level, I feel like I've loved chatting. So thank you. Do you want to give a shout out in terms of the book or any social handles or anything?
Because I've got different Twitter and Instagram. My Instagram is I am Kevin George, and my Twitter is _ Kevin George.
Okay, good. And go out and buy this book because I'm about a third of the way through it, and it's very interesting. If you want to read more.
Cheers, man. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you, Manny Geese.
Signing out. KG, you like that one?
Yeah, man, really good. Really good.
So all the geezers, sheezers out there, thank you for listening and watching. And until next time, take it geezy.
Today's a day